I don't know how to phrase it.
Like computers, words are hard.
Yeah, I know. Especially without Grammarly. Oh man. I'm just gonna put uncooperative maintainers upstream.
All right, it looks like it is our standard family on the call today. Did I overlook anyone that may be new to the group? I don't think so.
I think.
All right. Can I have some assistance in taking notes today? Can I get a volunteer for scribe? Please. All right. Well, I'll do my best to take some half-assed notes. I can't guarantee their accuracy.
Yeah, I think we'll all contribute today.
That'd be great. I would appreciate it.
We're all partially available.
I'm on a phone. That's why.
That's okay. Do we have any additional, feel free to put any opens. First off, I would like to start off getting an update from the two teams that have met yesterday, just to give the whole group an update. This will be kind of our repeatable process. Every time we have a full SIG, we'll have the sub teams just kind of report out their activities real quickly. Unless everyone that was on all of those calls is the only people on this call. So we're team one. Just give me a couple minutes, please. Yeah.
Basically, we're identifying problems, and long story short, we're kind of trying to. I mean, it kind of relates to what we're doing in SIG 2 as well, because there needs to be kind of like a sync between both, as in what we identify as the problems need to be implemented as services in group 2. Sorry, not SIG 2, group 2. So I think that right now we're at the point of discussing where we're going to find the problem, because I think the problem can be found kind of across the board, but at what point are we going to focus, and who are we going to focus on, is kind of where we're at right now. And I would also say mode of engagement is also there, because I remember in group 2, another thing that we discussed is, are we going for critical or are we going for educational?
And that's a preview of a decision we'll make here in a little bit.
Yep.
Any questions about the group 1 status? We had one meeting so far. All right. Is someone interested in Francis?
Where do you take the notes, the meeting notes?
Well, my friend Emily helpfully put all of the existing meeting notes at the top of the full SIG agenda. And as I have time, I will circle back to the Git repo, and each plan, I will also put a link there. So we'll have multiple places you can get to it. But right now, the full SIG agenda is kind of the center of our universe. And thank you to Emily for grabbing those links. I don't see Mr. Mannion on. Does someone just want to give a real brief summary of what we talked about in team 2?
I can do that.
Thanks.
I guess. So kind of what I was saying. So SIG group 2 is focused on services. It seems they have a lot of it already typed out. I think Emily did a lot of that work with Art. So they're pretty well organized. They're trying to move on stuff that doesn't necessarily depend on group 1, although group 1 is trying to produce an output of problems and kind of scope. But yeah, basically there's some things that need to be discussed today in order to kind of, I wouldn't say unblock group 2, but in a way somewhat unblock them. So yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And as Francis notes, we have Team 3 call scheduled for Friday. So we'll get that rolling here. And just to summarize for everybody, what our intention is for the small groups is to look at that part of the plan that that particular group is focused on. And we want to start to document a project plan, so to speak, of actions we want to take and resources or actions that need taken in order to achieve those goals. So again, we're trying to refine and finalize those plans so that we can come back to the governing board with a concrete ask. This is what we're doing. This is what we would like to have in order to achieve these goals, and then have that dialogue with the funding committee. Any questions about that? Sir?
How, just generally speaking, how scrappy should we approach this for, like, as an angle? Like, should we assume that we'll have budget quite a bit, or zero budget?
I would say we swing for the fences. We asked for what we think that this group plus additional volunteers plus hired staff will be able to achieve, but we don't want to commit to, sending somebody to the moon, because that's well out of scope and budget. And I'm not going to volunteer for that.
So I would also add on, Brian Bellendorf graced us with his presence in one of the meetings yesterday and did call out a reasonable expectation for program management level support for these related activities. So at a bare minimum, we should expect for and potentially plan on having that.
Yeah, and what he's referring to in general there is out of the 10 item streams in the plan, only 3 have actual started to work, and this is one of them. So they're potentially, the barrier to some people starting may be the fact that they don't have a project or program manager to help facilitate meetings and whatnot, whereas we're kind of self-managing a bit, but we also want to bake into the plan as we are proposing this security team. What support does that security team need to continue forward? Do they need program project management, marketing support, whatever it might be? All right, let us talk about the decision we need. I will do a vote over email since we don't have all of our regular attendees, but we'll kind of tee up the discussion, and then I will send an email out to get everyone to put their X or Y on. So we are at a crossroads, as Randall mentioned. We are starting to build out the plan with concrete actions. We need to determine what our goal is. And it boils down to essentially, are we creating a volunteer / small hired team of people that will be handling intake, triage, remediation, and disclosure, assisting however they can with upstream projects? Are we creating a dedicated team of people and volunteers? Or are we going to focus more around education? And we're going to go out and mentor people. We're going to provide good practice. We're going to try to collaborate with folks to try to ease them into this. And that's kind of the big divergence point. Now, that's not to say we can't do both, but we need to commit to in the plan as we are mapping out resources what we're asking for. And that has some big implications about like what services we're going to be offering. Randall.
There's 2 things I wanted to point out. First of all, I think there was the objectives. We also need a decision on what, because we initially said that we were going to have 10, we would be happy if we could handle 10 incidences, but we never defined what was an incident. And we also never really finalized on that. And the other thing I want to point out is that yesterday, I don't know if you guys followed Slack or Twitter, but I don't know. I think it was a scorecard team that got kind of put on the spot.
Might have been Alpha Omega.
It might have been Alpha Omega as well. Basically we're getting pushback from maintainers about involving ourselves. So I think that's relevant because coming out of the conversations yesterday, that is one of the things that we talked about how much do we want to impose ourselves into like a situation. And I think that's a relevant discussion. Also on the discussion of education, I did go through some of the other repos we have, and I did write a motivation that I sent across as well. But there are other SIGs that do focus on the educational side of things, like as far as reaching out to projects and like helping them implement secure practices and things of that nature. There's not like a specific one, but I know the education SIG has a large responsibility there. And I know that one of the things that came up was that it would be really nice if we can all coordinate and not like when I say all, I mean all the working groups. I know that I think it was either Michael or Luigi that mentioned that there's like a disparity in how like all the working groups operate. So I think that's also worth mentioning because we're kind of a very forward like working group. So I just wanted to bring up all of those points.
Any comments on Randall's thoughts before we move over to Francis? All right.
I mean,
Francis, why don't you share your thoughts.
I do have comments on Randall's thoughts as well, actually. So on the topic of being prescriptive versus non-prescriptive with respect to repo owners, I think that Emily and I actually discussed this as well in the document that we proposed for like a starting place for conversation. And my position is the same as back then, which is we should definitely not impose ourselves. We should really just be on-demand assistance kind of thing. And that should be our position, like as the OpenSSF. Otherwise, we will meet quite a bit of friction, and it's showing already, and we haven't even yet started. So that's my opinion about it. And yeah, I think that was the major thing. And like on your question, Crow, like what should we do as a CERT? Like, should we actually staff a team for incident response if needed, or should we actually be more around education? I think that we should do both, and we should actually use peacetime as education/training with our energy. Whenever our staff is not fully engaged, yes, okay, we do have time to go about and help out and train folks. But but incidents take precedence, quite simply. But we should actually probably document quite explicitly that peacetime is for training and education.
And to note, since I am a little involved in the education SIG, that group already has a docket of materials that they're working on, and they would be glad for contributions, but they need subject matter experts to provide the material, the core material, and then it can be massaged. So if we want to do, if this group wanted to make a class to help educate upstream maintainers on how to interact with researchers, for example, we would have to create that core material and then collaborate with the education SIG to get that crafted and polished and potentially.
It's actually a good point, Rob, because I'm inventorying everything we currently have for like the education SIG, and we actually don't have that.
It's a gap. I agree.
We have testing.
Yeah.
This group would have to collaborate with that group, even though it's like we're dull. Well, a bunch of us are the same people.
Yeah.
We'd have to collaborate with them to create that material and then kind of inject it into that work stream.
Yeah, and it makes perfect sense to me to have like our folks here in the CERT actually go and give like half-day trainings during conferences, or just get like an OpenSSF track or whatever that is, right? It makes perfect sense to me to raise awareness in that sense.
And I have some awesome news for those of you in the education SIG. The Linux Foundation has an instructional designer on staff. I met the lady in Ireland, and so she's going to help the education SIG actually develop a professional looking class and with learning objectives and everything. So she'll be a general resource for everybody. And again, for us, if we want to do IR stuff, we definitely could leverage her and the other folks in the LF education team.
Could you talk to me about that off chat or on Slack? Because I've been assigned by SKF to redesign, and we had a meeting with David Wheeler about a whole redesign, and we're trying to not, yeah.
Yeah, no, I need to track the young lady's card down. I don't know if I shoved it in my suitcase and my backpack.
Sure.
I have a whole pile of receipts here. I have to do my expenses.
Yeah,
I'm still getting my legs back under me from the trip. But yeah, as soon as I find her, I'm actually going to invite her into the education group.
Awesome.
Once we're a little more on stable ground, but that will definitely be a resource that this group can leverage as well, as we are thinking about what types of education. And it might not be a class, it could be a class, but maybe it's a webinar, maybe it's a little marketing slick, like a little note card that we can just kind of electronically hand out. Here's the 5 steps for incident response you should be aware of, with links, like how we did the concise guides in the best practices group.
Right.
Maybe we produce a concise guide to incident response as part of this group.
That's a good point. I could actually pull those SKF, or I could pull that in SKF, the concise guides. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah. But there's a lot of different ways we could take this. But as a group, this group needs to determine how we want to approach this problem. And it could be phased over many years or months, but we need to kind of put a stake in the ground so that we stop staring at our navels and kind of relitigating the same things. We need to decide we would like to have, X amount of full-time staff. We want to cultivate Y amount of volunteers from the membership. And we want to do these types of education. So we just need to kind of decide and get that baked into our commitments in the plan.
I like what Francis said. I agree with everything Francis said. However, the question would, in my mind, would now be so if let's say that it is a 50-50 thing, like 50% education, 50% incident response. What happens to the critical incidences? Because if we're going to be an incident response team for critical instances, that's not necessarily the best time to be learning about an instance or incidents.
Oh,
sorry.
Based off of my experience, I think we need to spend a lot of time learning from the people that have blazed this trail before us, kind of learning from Mark Cox and the Apache Foundation, learning from the Cubes team, learning from Susie Canonical Red Hat, Solar Designer, and kind of thinking about how best we can engage with the upstream community and not offend them. That could be the absolute worst thing. That the OpenSSF has a staff of jerks going around trying to make people do security. We want to avoid that impression. So I think we need to spend a big chunk of our first couple months interviewing, learning, and listening, and talking to actual maintainers so that we can craft the best possible services. And in the meantime, we're building our process documentation. Here's how to manage an incident. We're collecting tools that we can do private communications, or we have a defect tracking system. So we can still do this in parallel, but before we actually start doing incidents, I think we have a long ways to go before anyone steps into the next Log4Shell thing.
Right.
Any value.
I can also bring the Gen 2 team that has a lot of experience here. Specific, to be honest with you, I've had a lot of talks with John, who's AJAC on Gen 2, and he really thinks that the CERT should be very non-incident focused, because he feels like there's already a lot of people that point out problems and don't do things about them. And he said that would be the main thing. Like, if we're going to do something about it, like when we say we're going to handle 10 incidences, does that mean 10 patches? Because that would be helpful. But if it's 10 incidences that we're just going to finger point, that already exists, and that is not helpful.
And maybe we become a communications conduit, that we get included in the last leg of a vulnerability disclosure, and we assist to make sure that that message gets amplified out downstream. Maybe that is part of our role, or maybe we help them write the advisories.
Or maybe as a facilitator of sorts.
Yeah, that could be a very useful thing potentially, but I don't think there's going to be one way we do anything, because every project is different.
That sounds like a real good conversation for the section 1 or 2.
Yeah.
Yes.
That being said, revisiting something I said before. So how do we feel about, because I know we talked about intake on section 2. How do we feel about, because I know part of that was us being proactive. So I don't know if that proactivity is seen the same way, because I think that's what's getting Alpha Omega into trouble.
Yes, and potentially, like, being proactive, maybe we partner with Solar Designer and the distros list and OSS security. And as new incidents are reported through that vehicle, maybe we find ways to amplify that messaging. That could be a potential path for us.
Well, I still like the idea of kind of like having, like, for example, one of the things that also came up is, like, if we're going to get involved, we need to know their security practices, who their security people are, how they want to do the disclosure. So, like, it'd be really hard for us to just go into something and do something, like, just know everything right off the bat. I think it would make sense that, for example, going back to objectives, trying to kind of handle that as well. If we had X amount of projects that we know, for example, like, if we're going to offer this to say 100 projects for year 1, I think in 100 projects, you're going to get your 10 incidences. I think both of those numbers should kind of like work hand in hand, if that makes sense. Because I do think that when the team gets put together, however many projects we have, someone's going to have to go through them or go with them. And they might not even have that stuff already generated, which means that we're going to have to help them generate those policies, right?
Another useful activity could be, as Randall mentioned, we don't know how all these different teams execute, potentially creating that catalog of, this is how different upstream teams work. Here's their contact information. Again, being that more of a facilitator, that's another option that we could take this path, is kind of collecting some of that information and providing that as a resource, because that is something that is very definitely missing within the community, is any kind of like a directory of how to get a hold of these different projects and security teams.
Furthermore, another thing that was discussed is what like the qualifications, because I think that also falls in there, of like a project. In other words, like, how many do they need to have a certain amount of, I don't know, stars or downloads, or I don't know how we're going to qualify that, but I'm just throwing stuff out. But that was something that came up because, yeah, all of open source is very vague and very large.
Indeed. So what are other people's thoughts on this topic, as we've been throwing out some ideas and talking through things? Did anything we talked about sound like something that you would be interested in participating in, or the opposite, something you feel we should stay away from?
I will say that, given my penchant to side with the maintainers, any of the work that we choose to participate in should be in close collaboration with them, or as a passive offering mechanism, definitely not barging in. That is something that is extremely important to me, and I know to many of the other maintainers that I've talked about this with, particularly in the CNCF community. As far as the remainder of the work goes, I definitely also agree that the concept of incident response taking precedence over education and support to projects working through or establishing their vulnerability disclosures, embargo, and other incident response processes, certainly a way that we should go, leveraging the existing body of work that the EDU SIG is taking on and any additional professional resources that the LF and OpenSSF, other foundations and organizations are willing to provide us. Regarding the direction of the group and the objectives, I've made substantial suggested changes to those that Randall has graciously provided us as an initial starting point for discussion.
Right. So why don't we take a few minutes and read the Randall's proposal with Emily's suggestions, and let's say in 3 minutes, we'll start talking about that. So take a few and start reading through that. Oh, thank you for making it bigger. My old eyes. Whoever's watching this video will be enthralled and ensorcelled as watching us all read.
You want to put some background like music, elevator music, something? Stay on the line. Top people are working on your requests.
Looks really good, Emily.
You're an excellent wordsmith.
I was going to say, it certainly helps when you have material to start with.
Yes. Yes, but you do an excellent job of polishing. Skills I've
Thank
lost
you.
over the years.
It's what a former career in government does to you.
And another, when you're done reading, go ahead and just give me a thumbs up so we know that we can restart our conversation. All right, let's give it 30 more seconds and we will get rolling. All right. So overall, at a 50,000 foot view, are we happy with the words that Randall initialized for us and that Emily helped polish? Directionally, we feel this feels good for something to write down as motivation for our team.
I agree, and this would be an excellent addition to our README.
+1 on that. any additional, Jennifer also gives us a +1, any additional thoughts or changes we'd like to make? I made one small tweak down in the second paragraph to note that we want to assist upstream communities, but we also need to assist downstream consumers in understanding what's going on. My personal feelings is that incidents like Log4Shell, while upstream did not execute perfectly, I think they followed their rules, did the needful. It was a problem with the downstream suppliers, and then ultimately consumers being unaware of the software and needing to take action. So if we can help amplify like the work that the Apache security team did and making sure that it's pushed further downstream, I think that would be a win for the open source community. Emily.
I would also add in, and there's a third element here that we have not discussed to date, and I'm just thinking about the other stuff I'm involved in, and that there's the vulnerability management tooling and ecosystem itself associated with this,
Yeah.
which is often ripe for problems. And a very good example of that is Twitter is by far the most accurate and worst at the same time in understanding what the current state of a vulnerability is in our ecosystem, as we saw with Log4Shell, and as we continue to see with more and more vulnerabilities being reported around projects that either lack the extended research for confirmation and are more focused on putting information out there. So I think that might be something worth considering as an objective and a direction for the group beyond just the consumers and the producers.
I definitely think that that is something that needs addressed. Speaking from my direct experience, Red Hat product security had a massive problem that no one understood the advisories, especially within the tooling ecosystem. And so they spun up a whole team of people and developed a certification program for these tooling these tool companies, to make sure that they were using the accurate information. And it's anecdotally a lot of work. And I don't know that a bunch of volunteers will be able to fix that. But if we want to commit to that, I think that's something I think it's very worthwhile and important to do, because the tools are definitely part of the problem.
I will say that not necessarily fixing the problem, as is often the case with more senior engineers, we serve a function of connecting people with the right resources and providing a little bit more color and background on it. So that would be my proposal to hopefully limit the amount of things that we are volunteering ourselves for.
Yeah.
Sorry, joined late, heard words that sounded familiar, and I annoyed Emily and others with my little markdown file yesterday. And here, this is why I'm here. Listen, ready? So I'll put my camera on so you can get the full deal today. At my post-CERT coordination center company, I still do coordination. We looked into this Apple iOS vulnerability. Turns out it was in XPDF, a popular open source product. We followed the supply chain, no CVEs, no fixes, nothing downstream. We went and did all that. It took we had more than one person. And if I compressed all the time, maybe a half week, maybe a little more than that, 3-4 days of net, compressed time, round trips to project maintainers, being respectful of their wishes, took days and days of round trip time, time zone issues. I don't want a CVE. Well, do you mind if I write one for you? Okay, fuck it, sure. Do you like what I wrote about you? Yes, please change this word, right? That took weeks of round trip. Culminating in an OSS security post, Poplar and XPDF. and everything dependent on them has one more integer bug, which might be exploitable, might not be. You want to prove that? It's going to take some more time, right? So to me, this is the sort of thing, and again, personal opinion here, that is the kind of thing I think would be valuable on a case-by-case basis to the open source community. And it had a good free example in hand where lack of CVE, lack of downstream awareness was clearly an issue. But I'm saying it took some real effort and some modest skills, modest only, to sort that out. So over, thank you for my rant. I'll try not to say this on every call for the next month, but you might hear it again. Over. Yep.
Randall.
We love your input, Art.
Thank you for saying that nicely. Yes.
No, I wanted to get your opinion because you weren't here.
Okay,
what's
sorry,
your opinion of what's going on in the general channel right now, or we're getting pushback from maintainers? Basically, yesterday we kind of had this like little group of maintainers that kind of like indirectly kind of gave us the middle finger.
I got, yeah, that is my experience. Almost, not all the time. The majority of the time, I encountered the stereotypical, I'm not saying this judgmentally, right? Busy open source maintainer. I've got a running list of like single humans on the planet who are responsible for a big chunk of the internet. Like I've talked to them over years. I know their names. They're not well funded. They're in their spare time. They're going to fix it when they're back from holiday in Europe, right? The entire month of a month. And then, you know, in their evenings, they're going to fix the bug. And they do, which is great. But pressure, please do this now, has never worked. Meeting them halfway or more has worked, but it takes time. That's the nature of the beast. That's by my experience. So I haven't seen like a, you know, fuck off sort of, we're being recorded. Great. So anyway, you know, go away necessarily,
And
but
engineers.
yeah. Anyway, sometimes you'll get that. Right? OpenBSD will give you that, but
no, if you actually go into general and you look at the blog.
I'm sorry, I suck and I'm not. Yeah, I have to.
Well,
I'm trying to find my Slack tab.
The blog, right? Yeah. It basically says that what we're doing is completely destroying supply chain integrity. Like we're literally undermining all bits of security. And yeah, like if you start following the threads on Twitter, and I'm not on Twitter for this very reason, but just because I enjoy the circus. Yeah, basically like Google's getting a lot of flack because I guess there's a lot of Google engineers involved. So Google kind of gets the blame, but we get a lot of the blame that we're like pushing, hitting agendas and stuff of that nature. And yeah.
So I'm happy to, I assume general you meant Slack, which I probably am still not properly signed up for. I'll go read. I don't see how we're hurting supply chain stuff. I think we're going to be helping.
I can post the link of the blog.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. If we're picking up work maintainers are too busy in a very natural way, don't want to do, that's the whole point. Right? None of the maintainers in the little toy example I dealt with wanted to go write a CVE. They were happy to take the fix, especially when we handed it to them or pointed to where Poplar just cloned XPDF exactly, and they could just import the patch directly. Great. That was awesome. We contributed back, right? Meeting halfway. But they were not going to go do stuff. One more bug as far as they're concerned. They're going to get to it when they get to it. That is my experience for the most part, right? OpenBSD will tell you to go cram it with walnuts. Apache is different, right? Apache and Red Hat are different organizations, and they have sort of more mature, better capacity sort of pCERT, and they'll handle their own stuff very nicely, and they help others handle it. So there are already some places that do handle it for others, but there are gaps. My kind of initial vision is that the CERT here would, and you got to be selective, right? We don't need to, you know, manually write up 10,000 low-end CVEs. But when you see a gap and something fell on the floor, backfill that, make sure the distros downstream know there was a bug. There are lots of gaps like that at the very least. Sorry, I'll shut up again. Over.
So, no, I actually think it would be good also maybe to have you if you can to participate in group 1, because I think that all fits in the problem. And I think that kind of what Emily said, and I mean, I'm trying to walk the line here where we don't go too much, but like over. But yeah, like I definitely see where being intrusive can be a problem. I also want to comment from the group chat that I have from the NPM best practices blog. It was mentioned that I should mention that approaching, like having a new person when there is an incident, just like get involved in a project, is very stressful.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Avishai, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I lowered it because it was pretty much already covered by what Art was saying. But specifically, I think that the rant that is going on in general was about adding, I think, scorecard action to a project. It wasn't specifically about a vulnerability disclosure or, as Randall was saying, a useful kind of contribution, like here is the fix to this problem we believe you have. So I think that this differentiation is important here. I think that in some part we can be also actively helpful to the community, right? And not just passively. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Let me just say that I do think that moving forward, we have to figure out like how active do we want to, or how proactive do we want to be? I think that's the key here. Because I think if we're actually working with groups that are willing and like need the help, I think that there's not a problem. But I think if we get proactive and start involving ourselves in things, I think that's I just I don't think we have the marketing for that. To be honest.
Well, and there's a precedent right now with like the Alpha and Omega project. They've changed their tact. They initially were going to be kind of pounding on doors. We're from the Linux Foundation. We're here to help. And they've altered that tactic. And now they're approaching ecosystems like the Node community, for example. And they're going in and doing at like not a foundation, but kind of at a large community level, kind of a top down, where they're talking about, they're providing funding for those projects to do audits or to invest in tooling. So that may be an approach we can piggyback on, that, you know, if we have these friendly communities, we can come in and do our security buddy presentation. Hey, we're the security buddies. You know, we have some awesome tools and techniques and training, and we can help this whole ecosystem potentially. And that could be a tactic to get engaged in some communities and projects. But yeah, I think there's 8 million projects on GitHub, so we're not ever going to be able to get everybody and do it consistently. Emily,
right?
As a matter of brevity and time, the OpenSSF also has a maintainer representative that could be leveraged in any of the work that our group potentially decides to take up, and ensure that we are appropriately representing their voices and concerns in any of our activities, and steering clear of anything that would be considered untoward. So anything that we decide to do moving forward, we can always check in and then proceed with caution or whatever the recommendations are.
so I don't want to, I want to be respectful of like Ian's time. At what point do you think we would approach them?
That is an
Is the plan
excellent.
baked enough now, or do we need to give it a couple more months?
I think that from an initial guiding star, reaching out to Ian to understand whether or not we're headed in the right direction is a good first start. That way we are not overburdening them with constant requests for, can you verify this? And then if there is anything that we think should be questionable, we can follow up accordingly.
Okay. So, somebody stole my pen while I was in Ireland. Oh, man.
It was a leprechaun.
I will take the action item to reach out to Ian to see if they have some time to look at the plan, just directionally. Do they see anything that they feel is objectionable, or we need to kind of pivot on a little bit? But I will take that AI to reach out.
It might also be beneficial to request any additional guiding objectives that we should keep in mind as we design the work of the group.
Yes. And speaking of objectives, is the group happy with our little motivation paragraphs? Do we want to push that into our README file sometime today? We happy with that work?
Unless there's pressure to push it sooner rather than later, I would like to have another week to think about it.
Yeah, no rush.
Could I get a link to that? Because I don't know where I put my link.
I put it into the meeting agenda.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, folks, I think this was a good step forward for the team. Do we have any other opens or any items we want to talk about? We've essentially addressed my desire to start working on the README. We've addressed Randall's upstream maintainer. Someone on the internet is sad concern. Is there anything we want to collaborate on in the next 10 minutes?
Just to reiterate, are we gonna talk to Ian first and then figure out what our like objectives are? Because I think that's what we also need in terms of the groups so that they can design their stuff accordingly.
I will reach out and I will preface this that we are making this plan and we are not done yet. But will they have time in the next coming weeks to sit down with us to look through the plan and kind of give us feedback on things? We want to make sure that we are making this as pleasant an experience for maintainers and projects as possible. And feedback's valuable for that intention. So I will not ask anything to be done yet. Basically, I'm just kind of preparing things and kind of trying to get an allotment of time in the near future.
Well, I think we need to have a vote if we all are in agreement that 10 incidences for year one is what the goal is, because I know that was talked about, but I think you said that we still needed to have a vote on that.
Is that documented in the current plan? I know we had talked about it. It could be whatever number we think we're going to hit.
Correct.
Incident can be whatever we define it to be.
Didn't we also use the word engagement to kind of be more all-encompassing with respect to training, helping out, getting involved of sorts? I think we're comfortable with 10 engagements from my end.
Yeah, I think in 2023, this group and anyone else we are able to deputize and or hire should be able to effectively engage with 10 different, whether it's projects, vulnerabilities, or training opportunities. I agree, Francis. Now, I'll try to find the specific space that we talked about.
I would like to double check on the actions as I'm writing them in the bottom of the notes for the day. Crab, I have you reaching out to Ian to request feedback on our direction.
Yes.
I also have you as sending out a decisional vote on year 1 and year 2 goals regarding an incident response as our focus, education of incident response, or why not both, and the peacetime, wartime recommendation from Francis. Is there anything else that I missed?
I think that's it. I think that's an excellent remembering.
And then everyone else is to review the recommended objectives prior to the next meeting so that we can be duly informed on the progress of the group moving forward.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any closing thoughts, group? All right. I really appreciate your feedback. This was a good discussion. I like our motivation and our moving forward of kind of the framework of the group. And I look forward to our call on Friday about section 3. So everybody enjoy your day. I may see you later today. I may not. And enjoy. Cheers.